So, welcome everyone, and thank you for sharing this opportunity that we have. Welcome everyone, and thank you for sharing this opportunity that we have to be together in an enlightening way, right? And today, to close this month of January, we would like to have here with us, and there he is, our dear friend Brian Vosberg, right? And just on a more let's say serious note, we would like just to introduce him to you um, and say that Brian Vosberg has been a Spiritist speaker and presenter since 2005, having spoken at centers in New Jersey, New York, and Florida, as well as past Spiritist symposiums. Brian actively advocates living the principles of the doctrine and living a moral life. Professionally, he is a licensed professional civil engineer working as a project administrator, overseeing state roadway construction projects in the Tampa, Sarasota area of Florida. But beyond that, he's also a friend. For those of us who have met Brian, very kind soul, very nice person, and always tries to um, leave a conversation on a positive note. No matter what we present to him, he's a very positive man. This is at least forgive me, Brian, for bringing my perspective here, my ideas about you here, but some of our mutual friends may say the same thing. So, on that note, I would like to leave with you our dear friend Brian, who will be talking about being perfect. Be perfect, a Spiritist view. Thank you, Brian, and the floor is yours. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. And yes, this is the, it is interesting. I'm talking about this topic being perfect. And as we're just talking about trying to leave on a positive note. So I'm doing this lecture, realizing that by being a good person and trying to present that outward appearance, it helps me to try to fulfill it. As said in my bio, the idea is to try to live the doctrine and embrace it and become a part of it. So and with that, I have to remember for those of us that are kind of new to the topic, but most of us are probably very familiar with it. Spiritism has triple aspects: the philosophy encapsulated in the Spirit's book, religion, gospel according to Spiritism, and science in the book. And it has a wonderful point where all three work together to enlighten, inspire, and bridge each other one. Something we don't see a lot about. And for those of us outside in the outside world, there's a lot of debate about science, science, religion being polar opposites, and they're actually not. And the bridge philosophy is the one that helps bring that link together. We're talking about living a perfect life, and for the most part, this topic will be covered mostly in the gospel, because it is the way to do it. But it is not the only way, because the moral laws are contained throughout the doctrine. Notably, right now in the Spirit's book, the whole third part of the Spirit's book is all about the moral laws. And for anyone who's taken the time and read through the Spirit's book, questions and answers contained within, it does explain in more detail nuances of some of the moral laws that are out there, whereas the law of destruction, law of reproduction, and so many other laws that are there to promote how to improve our lives and to live a more moral life. Even if we stumble and fall, there are ways for us to pick ourselves back up. The gospel, pretty much the entire gospel, is one giant book on morality. And reading through it, each section, it's amazing the amount of things that you read and seeing like the love that Jesus shared with us, with his disciples, and then the spirits coming behind them and adding a new layer of definition that we didn't understand back when Jesus taught the disciples 2,000 years ago, but then coming in and having the spirits add another layer of depth. When humanity, when Allan Kardec wrote this, was able to reason and go more in depth, think abstractly, concepts that were very hard to do 2,000 years ago, humanity has finally progressed enough to be able to understand terms that were outside of the realms of the time, and that even to this day we're learning new and incredible things that have been around that have not even been around in Kardec's time. Just thinking 170 years ago and all the progress that's been done. No computers, cars were just barely being invented. We haven't flown yet. Atomic energy, so much stuff has happened, and that has greatly expanded our own knowledge. And this is going into like the mediums book. But for the moral laws, the area that really spoke to me on this one when I was preparing for this lecture was the chapter about obsessions and realizing how we are susceptible to jealousy, pride, selfishness, all kinds of things. We're allowed to be tempted. In comic, for a lot of the cartoons, you have the devil on one shoulder and you have the angel on the other, and they're all both whispering to you, and you choose which one you want to go to, who are you going to listen to. And that's kind of like where the obsessions within the mediums book does, and it does explain that the values and the reasons for being a moral life, so that you're not undergoing the subjugations, the fascinations, and the simple obsessions that it suggests, which has been used a lot in all kinds of movies, usually the scarier ones, and why things are taboo, scary, and things like this. And then where the mediums book says like, hey, live a moral life. It gives you protection. It helps prepare you to face what these lower order spirits can and will try to do. Moving on with heaven and hell, you sit there and it has in one of the sections there the penal code. So it kind of shows what happens when you live the life, a moral life, and when you don't. It tells you what you can expect either way. And this is fulfilled with the whole part 2 of heaven and hell being the examples. So you can sit there and read through spirits that lived a good life and how they are the happy spirits. And then you slowly progress down to those that didn't live such a good life, had some troubles, and in return, they, as a spirit, have to deal with the consequences of those moral actions. And the pains that they cause in others are being reflected back on them. And then even up to the point where they were even talking about the people that undergo debilitating diseases or conditions in the course of a lifetime to remove a past wrong. There was one that was told to me many moons ago about a person in the course of 2 lives. He had, in one life, he was a slave master, and he was one of those that would carry the whip, and he would whip the slaves. At the end of that lifetime, he came to face the errors of his ways, and he says, "Oh, please send me back, but in my next life, have me lose the arm that I used to whip these people with, so that I may rectify that wrong and go through a life unable to use that for evil purposes." He comes back in the next life, and he comes back as a bit of a carpenter / toy maker. And in the course of his life, he started making toys for children. and he would give these away. It was such a warm experience for him just to sit there and see the smiles and helping these children with something that he made. When it came time for the event to happen, he ends up losing his pinky. And then going through that life, at the end of that lifetime, they sat there and he talked to, and he said, like, but wasn't my plan to lose the arm? And I says, yes, but you showed so much good helping to give those kids toys that it took over. It mitigated the harm you did in your past life so that the consequences were reduced so that you only lost a finger instead of your whole arm. Looking back at that story brings us up to this idea of why we should be improving. This is just one example of many that we have. Thankfully, after the time of the codification, we now have the wonderful books of Chico and Divaldo and many others that have come, and they have brought that these messages of why we should try to live a moral life, to be more perfect. So, but what are the teachings within Spiritisms? Oh, Spiritists, love one another. This is the first teaching. Educate yourselves. This is the second one. All of you are here today. We're doing the second one. We're educating ourselves. But one of the more important things to do is we need to have love for one another. Just as Jesus taught us as the golden rule. Love your neighbor as yourself. We definitely need to practice this in our day-to-day lives. When looking through, listening to the news or seeing things going on in our day-to-day lives, it's easy to kind of forget this. But then also looking at the news, you can kind of see where it's necessary, it's needed. I use the examples of the war in Ukraine and also the war in Gaza right now. And looking at this and just sitting here, just from the high level, would these wars have started if there was a mutual love and respect between the two sides? There may be from one, but maybe not from the other. Or there's other things in play. Selfishness, pride, ego, who knows what. But if we truly had love, both of those engagements would not have happened because they would have shown respect to the other person, saying, you have a right to exist. And then the Spirit's book, question 799. What way can Spiritism contribute to progress? Destroying materialism, one of the sores of society, enables people to comprehend where their true interests lie. How many of us go through, we just had Christmas about a month ago. We all had presents under the tree and we all got gifts and things like this. How many of us still have or have already gotten over those gifts? To kind of sit there and say this materialism factor, it was great to have it, but the newness of it is already starting to wear off. It's not that now that we've used it, it's like, oh, this isn't exactly what we wanted, but whatever. The reasons are many. But we also realize that within Spiritism, we don't take our material things with us to the spirit world. We take just our spirits, our memories, and the things we've learned, our knowledge. So the love we've shared to people goes with us to the spirit world. The love we've received in return also follows us into the spirit world. None of our possessions, none of our clothes, none of our jewelry, none of our cars, iPads, phones, whatever, none of those follow us. Our bank accounts don't follow us. but what we do for others, the good we try to do for others, does. And as part of the intro is like, I try to leave making other people's lives better, try to leave on a happy note, inspire people. Just like, to use that phrase, just like I want people to inspire me. I want people to share good news and good things with me. So I'm trying to live that golden rule in my day-to-day life. I understand people will always have bad days. I have bad days. You will have bad days. And we should be there and say, okay, this is your bad day. It's okay. And like, whatever happens. When I lived up in New Jersey and I'd get cut off on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, before joining Spiritism, I'd get mad. I'd honk the horn. I'd do the one finger salute, all kinds of different things. But then after reading this and noticing this, it's like, you know what? Take into account what they may be going through. They could be late for work or job interview. Their wife is having a baby. Somebody just got admitted to the hospital. They're right off to go see them. When you make excuses, whether it's true or not, for the benefit of the others, it takes the sting out of, yes, it inconvenienced me. Yes, my brakes are super hot now because I had to jam on the brakes on my car. But I'm not holding that against the other person. I'm sitting there helping that other person to say, in many ways, I'm saying, I forgive you. And it's like, here, I love you enough that, yes, you hurt me, but I'm not going to let that bother me. And I'm going to move on. Because in many ways, that's a material thing. And we also need to, as I kind of mentioned with the conflicts that's going on, the prejudices of sect, caste, and color. For those that follow, especially unfortunately this year, it's politics season, it's election year. This is something that's going to be popping up the whole rest of the year. And there's going to be divisions, there's going to be all kinds of stuff thrown around to root for this team, not for this team. But yet, we're all human beings. We all have, and we can't keep throwing stuff at each other, can't keep dividing ourselves based on caste, sect, color, creed, you name it. We got to unify. We can't keep dividing. I was literally talking to some friends and we were going over this little maxim that I hear a lot. And it's kind of wrong because they were saying you got to put God first, then family, then we use country because that's usually what we hear, especially in military terms: God, family, country. But as I was talking to him, I was like, how many of our books, how many of our readings have we seen that we're supposed to treat each other, love one another, right there on the top of the screen? The brothers and sisters. We should be treating each other as brothers and sisters. So we should, if we did the whole thing that Jesus taught us, love God above all things, and then love your neighbors yourself, then we should be just doing God and then humanity, all of creation, right below. So we shouldn't be dividing. It's like, yes, we may do that for fun or something like this, but in the grand scheme of things, we can't let it override our thoughts and feelings. We got Super Bowl coming up. We got people that are going to root for Team A, Team B. We got the Olympics coming up. So people will be rooting for their country, for the medals. World Cup, you name it, there'll be a division. But we have to sit there and say, no matter what, yes, our team may win, our team may lose, but we are all human beings. We're all brothers and sisters. We need to keep that in mind and not let our passions get the better of us. Within the gospel, the be perfect is its own chapter. So I have just a couple of the sections I pulled out, and I slim these down as best I can. But when you're dealing with the doctrine, it is so hard to just do a bullet point of the great and wonderful teachings that are there. So I did my best, but unfortunately, it didn't get quite that down as far as I could. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who persecute and slander you. For if you love only those who love you, what reward will you have? We see this. I know Jesus, plenty of his teachings has us out there, even going so far as using the talks of the Good Samaritan. Samaritan was hated in that time frame. It was like the lowest caste that you can have, and yet that person had the moral perfection to help somebody that was hurt. So he got the higher reward. Do not the publicans do the same? Well, let's change publicans away to your enemies. Do not all people do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what are you doing that is more than what others do? Being down here in Miami, I was here for another center's Christmas conversation, and they had as part of their lecture, they were talking about the Christmas truce during World War I, where the Germans were on one side, the Allies were on the other side. The Germans started singing Christmas carols in German. The Allies started hearing it. They started doing Christmas carols as well. Both sides doing Christmas carols. So eventually got to the point where both sides were hearing it and being inspired. And I says, you know what? It's Christmas. You celebrate, we celebrate. I know shoot, you know shoot. They didn't. And they end up coming together, and for a period of time, a truce broke out. The Germans, Allies got together, played soccer, football in the middle, in no man's land. They traded, they talked, they enjoyed themselves for at least a day. And it's going right here with this. It's like the person on the opposite side may be your enemy today, but it could be your brother or your friend tomorrow. And we should reflect on that as a society, as a whole. Granted, as Spiritists, we learn these words, and we need to be the example as we take these things out after this meeting. I usually mention that whenever I do a prayer for the center. I always throw in there, like, whatever we learned today, inspire us and let us be the light as we depart to inspire those around us. So be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. Taken literally, we would presuppose the possibility of attaining absolute perfection. The people to whom Jesus spoke would have not understood the nuance. He led himself to presenting them with a model and told them to put forth the effort to emulate it. Within Spiritism, we know we can't be perfect in one lifetime. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing anything. We should always be trying to improve ourselves. We should always look in the mirror every day and saying, am I better than the day I was before? We have a lovely mention from St. Augustine to know thyself. There's a whole section on that. I believe it's in here a little bit later on. But we put that effort in to sit there and say, did I do everything that was right? Did I do everything that was wrong? And if I did wrong, what can I do to fix it? How can I make it better? Is a sorry just enough? Or, as we learned through the Spiritist book, is it going to be a trial and atonement? Well, I have to atone to this person to make up for the wrong that I did. We all can think of an example. of a person we accidentally hurt, or maybe intentionally hurt for whatever reason. But yet that hurt was taken in a bad light. Like, for an example, a tough love. Showing tough love to a person, it may be the best thing for them in the long run, but in the short term, it hurts them. But how much tough love can you show someone before they start to get resentful and hurtful because they said, all you showed me was the tough. I didn't see the love behind it. So we do need to put efforts in to make ourselves better, to try to improve as often as we can. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy. But one of the wonderful things about being a part of a center like this is you can set up something like a support group. Don't have to say what you're working on, but together you can sit there and like, hey, I'm struggling with my thing I'm trying to work on. And then the other people in the center can say, do your best. We got you. Don't need the details, but take your time for it. At my center last year, I made it as a challenge for Lent, the 40 days, to give up a vice, so that you can sit there and say, you have 40 days, everyone gives something up. Give up a moral vice. Try to improve yourself. And that way, when the end of the 40 days, you built a habit and your moral vice may be gone, or if not gone, reduced. And since it is a seasonal thing, everyone goes through it together. It kind of provides a support system. Now, if not everyone does it, not everyone follows it, but it was something as an idea. It's like, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to improve ourselves for this period of time. Don't know what you're giving up? Doesn't matter. But I got your back. You're going to try to improve something. I'm going to try to improve something. We're all going to try to improve something. Moral peoples are those who practice law of justice, love, charity, and its greatest purity. They live the golden rules. I mean, I know I try. I don't always succeed, but I try. Faith in God and in God's goodness, justice, wisdom. In circumstances, charity is their guide. They hold no hatred or rancor or desire for vengeance. They are indulgent toward others' weaknesses, and they recall these words of Christ. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. How many times do we go? We come here, we're here at the center, we go to our church, whatever, our place of worship, and we reflect for that period of time. But when we leave the center, when we leave our place of worship, whatever we're doing, do we flip a switch in our mind, or do we leave it on? I know before I got introduced to Spiritism, I'd be religious for the time I was at my place of worship. So for 1 hour a week, I'd think about things. And then I'd leave, go off, and go right back to my old habits and old things. I didn't really improve. And I was sitting there saying, but reading this and noticing that God is in our lives 24/7, 365, our entire lives. The Spirit guides, our mentors, are in our lives day in, day out. They're helping us all the time. we also need to be mindful all the time as well. We need to be focusing on our impacts in our day-to-day lives. If we want to improve the culture of our neighborhood, our society, our cities, country, our world, start within. Start small and let it grow. Inspire those around you to do good, to keep in mind. It's like, hey, live these golden rules. Treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. And also at the same time, reflect back on some of the things they do to you. It's like, perhaps why do they do the things they do? May help you understand them. I saw something, it's a little off topic, but it was a posting, it was attributed to Robin Williams. I'm not sure if it's his or not. But they were always saying, it's like, the one person in the room that always tries to make people happy knows what it's like to be sad, because typically they're the saddest person in the room. So, reflecting on this golden rule, if a person's out there trying to cheer you up and try to make you happy, is it because they need someone to come back and make them happy too? Food for thought. If someone's showing you lots and lots of love, is it because they don't feel like they've been receiving love? Now, please note that when you go through these things and try, I'm asking a lot because this is a lot. The topic is simple: be perfect. But just like so much from the teachings of Jesus, 10 Commandments, doctrine itself, it's easy to see, very hard to do. Leaving the doctrine, this is just a small sample. There's so many readings that we have. If the doctrine is the foundation of a building, of a house, Chico, Leon Denis, Divaldo, all these other writers, even our good friend Dan Assisi with his book, Our Road to Damascus, is building upon that foundation and adding to it, to this building, providing us numerous examples of things we can do to improve ourselves, to what happens if we do good, if we do wrong. I mean, Andre Louis was considered a suicide because as a doctor, he knew the dangers of smoking and yet he kept smoking. So in that way, he was held example because, like, for him to be perfect, he knew that smoking was wrong, but he didn't give it up. So he was held accountable to it. Emmanuel, he lived his life as a senator 2,000 years ago. Actually, personally meets Jesus. And then has his own road to Damascus moment where he finally opened up after committing atrocious things, blaming his wife for infidelity and all kinds of things. Doesn't get it until the end, after he loses his wife and realizing that it was his pride, it was his selfishness that didn't let him see the changes in his own beloved wife. And then to the point where he moves on to the next book of his series, 50 years later, he comes back as a wizened. He lost his title, he lost his power. He was a servant, but he was a wizened spirit. So he kind of started to make up for it. I was also just reading a book, finishing up another developed the Spiritist philosophy in the modern world, and I must have highlighted almost a third of the book. There was so much good stuff in there, and it focused a lot on how we do need to focus on trying to get rid of our selfishness, our pride, our egos, and focus on humility and charity. So before I close up and turn this back over to you, I was just reminded of we do need to put an effort into our day-to-day lives. As we leave, focus on our actions. How can it be perceived? How can it be taken care of? Like St. Augustine in his, as he mentioned before, and I guess I took it out. Reflect each day. Does someone have cause to blame me for something? And if so, how can I make it right? Did I do all the good I could? Is there good that I failed to do? And how can I go about fixing it? And start reflecting back on how we can improve, how our lives are better or can be better, and how we can improve ourselves, our families, our communities, everyone we meet, so that we go forth and we be just as I was introduced today, this nice person that leaves us on a positive note, on a happy note. Don't make that exclusive, make that universal. Everyone you meet will come back and say to you, it says like, that person was such a positive, happy person. He left me in a better place. That, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian, for this beautiful presentation. And I would like to add as well that is definitely not an easy topic, right? To share, right? And when we look on this idea of perfection, perfection to us, it's subject to a degree. It can be, for sure, it can be different for each one of us, right? We have norms we follow. We were part of certain cultures and whatnot. So perfection is quite hard, and what I am trying to reach is completely different to the perfection of others, right? So thank you for that. Thank you for bringing these teachings and highlighting these teachings to us, the references as well of how to get there, right? On that note, we would like to open up for some questions that we may have here, or perhaps the questions that we may have on the web too. We'll be, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be placing them on the screen so you can see them as well, and we can share them together. Do we have anything, Daniel? So here we have our dear friend Kirsten. Brian, how does someone inspire others if they feel that they themselves are suffering a great deal?
I kind of mentioned that a little bit when I was talking that quote from Robin Williams, because we don't know what each one's going through, what personal sufferings, which trials each person's going through. We're all different. But maybe, just maybe, our trial is something that another person has dealt with. And that as part of our social connections that we talked with each other, we can bring together different ideas, different concepts to work with each other's. I may see something, I may be suffering my thing, my perseverance, but I've beaten another one. And I can inspire that other one to a person that maybe is going through that same one. And then that person can be reflecting back to me with something they've accomplished, but I'm working through. We are both teachers and students. So I may be struggling in this thing. So I'll need help with this. But I can help someone else with this other task, this other thing. And maybe by that, we working together, we help ourselves and inspire each other. Even though I'm suffering a lot, that person may have the key to help unlock my suffering, and I may have the key to unlock someone else's.
The mutual help is definitely a necessity for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Daniel, anyone else? Paula asks, how do you teach others to remember we are all humans evolving to perfection when they are getting caught up in the differences? You are indeed a gentle soul.
Believe me, I try on that last word. It's one of the few things that, at least for me, I do enjoy with the sports arenas. We all have our teams, our groups, and everything else. And we root on our specific team. But then, whether win or lose, we're supposed to be able to come across over it. And just like we're supposed to have good sportsmanship and say good game to everyone else. That is something we should be taking into account in our day-to-day lives as well. And realizing that we all have our spots in humanity. Some of us are managers that have to oversee their subordinates. And then we have subordinates that have to do the tasks that are asked of us of our managers. We do have to reflect and sit there and think about that. But the other thing too is, as I was mentioning before, reflect back on what maybe their point of view. Can you take on their spot? Anyone following Facebook or something else, I see a lot of dating advice and everything else. And one of the big things they says is like, common one I says is like, when you give a lady advice, it has an expiration date. You tell her she's beautiful, it's only good for that day. And you have to tell them again the next day and the next day and the next day. And then they says, but on the reverse, you say that to a guy that, hey, you look handsome. That like lasts forever because of guys don't get compliments very often. So it was that using as an example of taking into account the differences, different positions from where you are to where they are and see how things go. I mean, within marriages, we definitely see this a lot. It's like we see the dynamic of, why aren't you taking out the trash and everything else? I just got home. We have that, but we do have to reflect on what circumstances could be around them, because we don't have the whole picture.
Thank you, Brian. We have a question from our friend here, Wendell, and it's on. Thank you. It's on.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for the great talk. My question is, the Spirit's book says that Jesus is the model of perfection that God expects us to achieve. But when we think about Jesus' teachings, we look at ourselves and we see us so far from this level. How to be motivated to believe that someday it'll be possible to achieve it? Thank you.
The most important thing to realize is Jesus did ask us to take up our cross and follow him. So we do need to promote that and try to live as he did, take on those challenges and try to improve. Yes, we have this big divide, but then look at how much humanity has progressed in 2,000 years from when he first did those teachings to now, we've addressed and started to facilitate all these wonderful concepts. Like it says, we're thinking abstract now. We're able to reason in a deeper level. And so we're starting to realize that things that we did back then that may have made sense is bad. And we should improve. Slavery, the death penalty, dueling. We even realize that wars are bad, even to the point that we made a comment, world wars. It's like, never have them again. And thankfully, we have not had World War III. And same thing, like it says, like I made this thing is like the atomic bomb was a device we've used twice, and no one has used it ever again. To the point that even with all the conflicts and wars we've had, to finally have a weapon that humanity says, I do not want to use this one. They'll use almost every other weapon in the arsenal, but that's one that they won't touch. They acknowledge how much power it has and how much its destructive ability, and it actually gave them pause to think and say, do I really want to do this kind of damage again? So we have gotten there, and we have improved, taking what Jesus has taught us, baby steps, things we have to make the progress. Humanity's doing it. The spirits are telling us we need to maybe pick up the pace and go a little bit faster. And we have plenty of books now saying that there's efforts going in to make Earth a world of regeneration, that we're coming out of trials and atonements, that we are transitioning out. And as we transition out of this phase, we are going to be inspired by all these other wonderful people that are incarnating on Earth that have never been here before. So they're bringing their thoughts and ideas from another planet, another sphere, and bringing it here and says, why are you doing it like this? Wouldn't this make much more sense? And it will. So like the spirits are helping us. They're inspiring us, and they're trying to help us move further down the path. So we do need to take Jesus' teachings into account. As I mentioned before, the golden rule, start with that, but keep going with the other topics. Hope I answered that question.
A question. I'm trying to hopefully not too much taking too much time from everyone else. We do have some other comments and whatnot. But you mentioned about that one of our brothers and sisters of now can be one of our brothers and sisters in the future. I'm using the word brother and sister to the now because sometimes we don't see them there yet, right? So we're implying here that we will have a future, right? Much like I would like to imply when we accept the idea of a future, of a past as well. What would be the best way for us to be perfect? To think about our past and become a better person, or become a better person knowing that we have a future? Or is it a balance of both?
I would say it is a balance of both. We do have our past. We have had our faults, and we bring our faults all the time up to the forefront. Sometimes we live in our misery, but sometimes we learn from our lessons, and from there we can try to chart our future forward. But the good thing is when we have other spirits, our fellow human beings, they give us their points of view. They can see things from a different angle. So we can start to see the forest from the trees. So when we start to be, how do I be the perfect tree in the forest? But maybe I'm a perfect tree for this spot in the forest. Who knows? Maybe I'm here for this reason, to help stabilize this part of Earth so it doesn't wash away and hurt all those people below, or all these other trees below. Likewise, there's ones above me that are helping me to make sure that I grow. So when we put this emphasis on how do we live our lives and try to be perfect, we should always try to improve and try to keep going up the hill. Same like as all of us have had our tasks. We learned our professions. We went from nothing to knowing our professions. If we are wanting to work out, we hit the gym, we start with light weights and we start to build up to heavier weights, or we start walking before we go running, before we go sprinting. We start small and work our way up, but we use our past to help guide our future. And we also realize that we use our future as our goal. And the doctrine, the teachings, the books, all of us have told us we have a bright future. All of us are going to be Christ-like, not this lifetime, maybe not in 100 lifetimes, but we will all be like Jesus in time.
Thank you. And I love the way that you brought the cooperation, right? That much like we're helping others, we're also taking account how much we're being helped as well, with your tree example. Thank you for that. Anyone else would like to ask a question or make a comment? Our dear friend Ralph. I'm sorry, your name? Rob. Rob. All right, our dear friend Rob. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hey, Brian. Good to be with you this evening. Just wanted to reflect for a moment on some ideas, thoughts, and see what your take might be, Brian. So yeah, when I think about basically evolutionary consciousness, we think about perhaps the ancient human long ago, how they perhaps experienced things. I think that there was sort of God in everything. There was an ethereal, there was an existential. Everything was perhaps one big thought of God, and God, of course, was everywhere and everyone. Like you mentioned, kind of that experience of the universal, that you encourage us all to meet everyone with that universal kindness and acceptance. So just looking at that, thinking about um, essentially science. So yeah, as I said, the humanities consciousness has evolved over the centuries, and we refined our psychology and our theology, our connection with God, personal relationship, and basically we perhaps refined our consciousness too much. A lot of people say that there's sort of the thinking of the 20th century, where the machine age, where we assumed the metaphor that everything is machine, everyone is machine. That's what creation is. We suddenly produced working uh, technologies and whatnot, and so we believe that was the proper imitation of God as we evolved our consciousness. So, as I was saying, perhaps we've evolved, refined too much, and we are now facing kind of a new paradigm, a new integrative approach, a holistic approach that many different people in the spiritual communities that we meet across different places and such, we're working together, and it's an emerging worldview that we all sort of touch upon. But yeah, it makes me wonder because, well, science, bringing the conversation of science acknowledges the human body as scientific study. It acknowledges the mind with psychological study, and emotions are generally understood to be another component of psychological science. But why has spirit been pushed aside and foreclosed by scientific methods and scientific insight and inquiry? So I'm drawn here today to the Spiritist meeting, thinking on that note of basically, this is my question now. Here's the final pitch. So how does Kardec's example as being a man of science who encountered how each of our individual experiences may honor that when we look within, we open ourselves to the approach of the perfect in oneself, in our relationship to neighbor, and to the universe of God in everything. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Rob. As I'm trying to go through and understand everything you were sitting there mentioning, one of the things that comes to my mind was Spirit's book question number 1. what is God? The supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. One of the things that always took me into heart was that it just puts God in an abstract term, intelligence. And something that we've kind of like you were poking at, is sitting there saying is like, intelligence is something we just don't know hardly anything about. Just like quantum physics and everything else, it is really a new area. We knew about intelligence, just like we know about the wind, but we haven't been able to really start to delve down into it. What is the intelligence? What is the intelligent principle that makes up our spirit? What and how it interacts and how it processes so many different things. So when we are sitting here looking at our beings and everything else, like I was just looking at some of those lovely pictures where they took the photos of that have like the aura pictures, or they show the energy of the spirit of a leaf and all these things, and then as it slowly dies and fades and it darkens and goes away. But yet, while it's still showing that the leaf stays green, it's still working, it still has a sense of life to it. And we have to realize that that's with us ourselves. Each of our beings has this wonderful radiant auras around us, and it pushes out and influences all those we meet. And we have the ability to change it, to make it brighter, dimmer, multicolors, one color, or try to make it as bright as we can. And then ideally, that's what we're trying to force, the brightness. And when we are working with that, with like our physical, the science really knows our physical level. Emotion level, it doesn't know so much, because it's hard to put emotions under the scientific method. It's hard to measure. Same with intelligence. When I think of like science, or even like I was mentioning before, God as the supreme intelligence, when he created us in his image, I keep thinking of ourselves, we are the creation, but yet he made us as a creator. We are the creators on earth in the physical realm, and we are the intelligence on earth. So, but yet we're his creation, we're his painting. So all of us, everything we can is like stuck on the canvas. Our science is limited to what can be done on the canvas. Our physical bodies is stuff that can be done on the canvas. And it's not until we disincarnate and become spirits that we're able to jump off the canvas. But while we're in the physical body, we're confined to it. But there's so much more out there. And like I said, the teachings of the spirits and everything else allows us to glance off the canvas and look out and see that there's something else out there, but we can't exist there, not as a work of art that's on a painting, but as a spirit we can. So yes, science is still learning. It's still in the very infancy of beginnings of realizing just how powerful our intelligence is. We have concepts in the Spirit's book that our spirit can travel at the speed of thought, much faster than the speed of light. And science has nothing that can go with that. It's mind-blowing in its own concept. But yet, the spirits say, yes, we can do that. We can leap planets in a thought, which is outside of our realm of physics. Everything we know, nothing can tell us how that's even possible. But yet, we know it is. Same thing, like many things that we learned was in like religious contexts in the past. Or say something like chicken noodle soup. Why was chicken noodle soup the remedy for so many things? We didn't know. It just worked. And then later on, as we grew intelligently and be able to figure it out, we were able to start to piece together, chicken's easy to digest. The noodles, it's a light broth, but it's fulfilling, gives you the nutrients to do the body. And in many cases, it becomes like religion in many ways acts like science fiction. And then as science improves, it becomes science fact. And so the same thing with religion. Like the religious concepts, we are learning how true they are, but we maybe don't have the ways to make it work yet. And I think this is what you're kind of going to, is like as we still keep growing and learning, we'll be able to find how much the spiritual, the religious, God's teachings, how it is the guidepost that makes us perfect. We just didn't realize that how well that path was laid for us because we didn't see it at the time.
Is the reason why we're here today as well, right? And trying to learn as much as we can from Spiritism, that is a science before anything else, that study this area of spirit. So anyone else, Daniel, in the web that would have a comment, or anyone else here before we close? Okay. Well, Kirsten says, this was such a heartwarming lecture, Brian. Really touching and genuine. Well, I guess I wasn't just spitting out words, right? When I said that he leaves us with a nice, a positive idea. Bring the last message back again, Daniel, please. Sorry, I didn't. Oh, Paula. Paula has another one. Do you think the root of the differences with negative judgments of others is fear of our changing way of life, with attack or anger at feeling left out?
Ooh, this is a good one. I can definitely see the fear. I can definitely see the anger. And I keep going back to what we learned from the doctrine. How much of this is selfishness and how much of this is ego? Because basically right here, you have both of them. With the anger, that's like an ego. The fear, and so it's like we're trying to figure out the negative judgments of others. It's we keep thinking about how our selfishness, our pride, our ego involves in so much. And we have to keep that in mind. We have to sit there and try to take ourselves out of it. How much of our life is based on selfishness and ego? And that's where the doctrine teaches us charity and humility. We need to humble ourselves. So when we do that humility, I think that helps us, as Paula, you're mentioning, root out the differences. It's like, are we doing it out of fear, pride, ego? And should we set that aside? Because how much of our life would be better if we, like it says, how much things we go in our life can we separate ourselves? And I guess that's where I was like the negative judgment. That's where I was sitting here trying to do of me being cut off in traffic. As I was sitting there saying, why did this person cut me off? And I came up with positive reasons, whether they're true or not, of why that person had to cut me off. Wife's having a baby, family members in the hospital, late for a very important business meeting, or late for work. You create positive answers, positive judgments, and and that way you're putting yourself in an optimistic mindset, not a pessimistic one, as kind of what you're saying here. The negative judgments, try to think things optimistically.
To be positive with all the bombardments that we have nowadays, right? So we really have to work extremely hard to reach perfection, right? When in the environment that we live, right? But we can change, right? We can certainly change. Any more comments, Daniel? So we can, our dear friend Melanie, aka Heavy Horse, a beautiful talk, some great questions and answers too. Thank you for connecting with us. Vladimir, thank you, Brian, for the wonderful lecture tonight. You made us reconsider a lot of our daily actions and thoughts, making them to be a good thing for us and for those we interact with. God bless. Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir, for connecting with us as well. And that concludes, our dear friend, this moment with our dear friend Brian. Hopefully connecting with us soon again to give a continuation to this, or perhaps address another topic that is important to us, right? That will uplift us, that will make us think, and desire to become a better person, to be perfect, right? To reach our level of perfections in the best way we can. So thank you for that, and for this moment as well. So with